I'm John Heilemann, and this is the Hell and High Water Podcast. This week's guest, senior White House correspondent at the Wall Street Journal, Michael C. Bender.
I'm Mike Bender, and the state of Donald Trump's post-presidency is surprisingly in flux. It's going to be an incredibly fascinating 2 years here for Republicans.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
So there it is. Not only a moment that I think will be written about, talked about in American history forever, but also the moment that gives our guest today, Mike Bender. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Jeff.
The title for his book, Mike Bender, my friend and former colleague, the author of Frankly, We Didn't Win This Election, the inside story of how Trump lost. It's great to see you.
Me too.
Here, as we sit here on the brink of the Bender rollout, which of course has been the pre-rollout has been masterfully orchestrated. The nuggets are appearing. The scoops are popping. Everyone's talking about Bender. You must be feeling great right now.
Yeah, it feels really, really good, and it's really reaffirming to see the my colleagues, my peers, treating the material the way I think it should be treated, and as very newsworthy and buzzy.
and let's. I want to start with this. Mm-hmm. The book is great, and you deserve congratulations for it. But I think maybe the thing you deserve the greatest congratulations for is the fact that Donald Trump's trashing you on the eve of the publication. Right, third-rate reporter Michael Bender. Now, I was going to say that I rarely agree with Donald Trump about anything, but in my experience, third-rate reporter Michael Bender is right on the nose. Kidding. Again, I think it's like the best compliment you could have. The president, who for a period of time referred to me exclusively as that motherfucker, to be third-rate reporter Michael Bender is the greatest compliment you can get, and will also juice book sales. So another piece of good news for you. Tell everybody, like, what's in the book. Like, what did you set out to do here?
Yeah.
And tell us what the book is.
So what I set out to do here was completely different from where it ended up. I mean, I agreed to do this back in the summer of 2019, where you and your listeners will remember there was, or maybe it's hard to remember, there was a period of that time where there was kind of a relative calm. Trump had survived Mueller, and he hadn't called the Ukrainian president yet. Right. I was getting home every day at 6 to leave the nanny, right? Like, and I was like, oh, a book, like, I'm going to write about spend all of 2020 writing about the campaign. Like, that sounds very doable. And then 2020 ended up being something much different. So what this book ends up being, I think is going to be unique even in the flood of Trump books that are coming out this year. This is going to be the only book that looks at Trump's, goes behind the scenes for how Trump oversaw a series of crises in the country in 2020. That also goes behind the scenes of the campaign infrastructure to see and explains how they struggled to respond. And thirdly, and I think most importantly for me, is it gives 2020 from the eyes of Trump's most dedicated supporters, the folks who went to rally after rally and rally, and tries to explain why, even in a pandemic, and the threat of coronavirus, that they showed up time and time again. And I think at the end of the day, what all this shows is just really how much more dangerous it was behind the scenes than we really thought, or that we knew at the time, and how close to the brink we got of uniformed military soldiers in the streets.
One of the things Trump is mad at you about is an account that you've given there of some tension, a fight with him and Mike Pence earlier over Corey Lewandowski, and that gets in then to Trump's relationship with Pence at the end when he was pressing Pence to do something he was constitutionally unable to do, which was to overturn the election. What are when you think about not just the things that are buzzy, but when you think about what the scoops in the book are that you think with the passage of time are things that have the greatest both historical import, like the scoops that matter, and either that matter to how history will look on Trump, or that are super illuminating about Trump. Things where it's like this is a story that's not only new but illuminates something about Trump that's really essential. Like what's in your category of like the bucket of A scoops in the book?
Yeah, I think the sort of the historical sweep of this, for me, one of the most important scenes is, you alluded to it here, is the back and forth with Mark Milley and Donald Trump, the Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman, right, in charge of the most powerful military in the world, and it's Trump and Milley and the whole circle, the whole universe of Trump world and military and defense advisors in the Oval Office on June 1st, and Trump is upset about. But it's really, I mean, he views the protests, the civil rights protests, in very personal ways, right? The Maggie Haberman and Peter Baker had broken the story about Trump hiding in a bunker a couple of nights earlier. He was embarrassed by that. So he wants military on the streets in order to, he thinks, sort of buttress his law and order image. And you, in this scene, you have Mark Milley trying to calm Trump down, and not having any luck. And finally, Milley, sitting in front of the Resolute desk, points to the portrait of Lincoln behind Trump and says, "That guy, Mr. President, had an insurrection. What we have is a protest," right? And I think that's a important scene. We have a couple of those in the book that show Trump's lack of interest in the history of any of these moments, and not understanding some of not caring about the difference between an insurrection and a protest. And I think that leads into your second question here about like kind of what it illuminates. What was fascinating to me at every level, whether it's the West Wing or the administration or the campaign, is how many people told me, well, I was one of the people who leveled with Trump. Like I told Trump the way it was supposed to be. Right. Like I was the truth teller. And then when you scratch at that a little bit, it's not exactly the case, right? And everyone was sort of telling Trump their own truth in their own way, in a way that Trump could hear the lie, right? I mean, there was never, very rarely was anyone point blank, no, right? Or right. That's not correct. Trump from day one, I mean, literally day one in office, wants to run for re-election. His singular goal is to win again.
No one is as big a liar as Donald Trump, but a lot of the people around him were liars and enablers, and there's challenges that brings to the reporting process, which I'll come to later. But in fact, if you go back, as the book shows over and over again, people are, they push back a little bit. They try to wheedle, they try to cajole, but they don't really ever just stand up and say no to Trump.
Right,
or
and
you're
I don't know,
wrong.
And I don't know how different at the end of the day that is from other presidents, right? I mean, once you get close to that kind of power center, you want to keep it, right? And I mean, obviously, Donald Trump is a much different president than we've seen before, and the rules here are different, or should be applied differently. But I do think there are, the way they described themselves as the truth tellers, but really what they end up being are kind of at best sort of speed bumps. Everyone thought they just have to give Trump his own time and let him process the loss, and he'd find his own off ramp into this sort of from this highway of outside of reality, and eventually get himself to figure out how to concede. But that Trump had been telling us for years this is what was going to happen, and when Mike Pence and Ronna McDaniel and Bill Stepien give him the space to process it, all that does is create an opening for Rudy Giuliani, right, and his band of conspiracy theorists to come in, and we know how that story ends.
Yes, and I think obviously one of the differences here between, yes, there's no doubt, every president's surrounded by yes men and women. Every president, people, their description of their roles is different from what it was, and very few of them want to, stand up to tell the president no. No one, that's true in any administration, Democrat or Republican, that you've ever covered or I've ever covered. But we've never had a president whose impulses were as bad as Donald Trump's, and we've never had a president who's, where so many people around him were fully aware of the notion that the president was, again, these are not my words, although I agree with them, was, intellectually, psychologically, emotionally, characterologically unfit for office. And this is their testimony. Again, not, some liberal attack. They all looked at Trump and said, this guy's dangerous. And then they justified staying in the administration as, I could help temper the danger. That's just a dynamic that we've never seen before, right? The dynamic of yes men who pretending to be no men is something we've seen before, but we've never seen a president where the yes men, where the people who were serving them, saw that their boss as a clear and present danger, described their role as helping to temper it, and then their yes men tendencies ended up enabling it rather than tempering it. That is, I think, unique in American history, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I agree. And the frustrating part for me it was hearing some of that in real time, right, and certainly after the fact. But then, how many people wanted to still,
get credit?
How many people told me, well, you take credit, right? shift blame. I mean, but they wanted to, make the point and correctly that Donald Trump is a different kind of president, but that they applied all of these old rules and how to manage the office and manage the president. And every president needs management. I'm not saying, that. I mean, Donald Trump is a special case, but. Previous presidents you need a lot of people around you to make that place work.
Yep.
Trump didn't have that.
Right.
The people he had around him, I think this book also shows, is the people that he had around him were around him, it turns out not as guardrails, but for their own gain, for one reason or another. I mean, I hope this comes through. I mean, Trump from day one, literally day one, in office wants to run for re-election. His singular goal is to win again, a second term.
So here's one of your many scoops. So Trump goes to Europe in 2018 to honor, to mark the 100th anniversary of World War I, and says flattering things about Adolf Hitler in the presence of his chief of staff, John Kelly. So tell this story, and then I'm going to ask you about Trump's reaction or lack of reaction to it so far in public, but just tell the story, because I think it's pretty shocking. Yeah.
So this is in the realm of his chief of staff, his team around him, giving him, briefing him on what the event is, who's going to be there, why it's important. Some of the basic things that any president, governor, county commissioner, any of that stuff would expect from their staff. And the conversation quickly devolves when Kelly and others realize that Trump doesn't really have a good grasp on who the allies and enemies were, and John Kelly, who's very, very much a history buff, walks through some of it with him, and tells him how this opens the door. Some of these things open the door for World War II and Adolf Hitler, and Trump's response is that, well, Hitler did do some good things. And what Trump is talking about here is Germany's economy, right? Which shouldn't be surprising in that that's what Trump kind of latched onto. Germany had some good years under Hitler in their economy, but that's not really the point, right? And that's what John Kelly...
Try to refrain from laughing, but yeah, it's not... it's both horrifying and hilarious, but yeah, go ahead.
Right, and John Kelly tells him, well, those people would be much better off poor, right? Even if you give them the economy point, these people would be much better off poor than what they end up going through under Hitler. So let's not say that. Do not say this ever publicly, right?
The quote is, well, Hitler did a lot of good things, right? So forget about history. about, yes, Trump is an ignoramus when it comes to, I'm not saying he's an idiot, which is a different thing. We can discuss that. But he's an ignoramus about almost everything, doesn't know very much, is intellectually uncurious, doesn't know history, doesn't know about a lot of things, right? Vast acreage of things that Trump doesn't know about, isn't curious about. This is actually one of the many things that makes him problematic as a president. So it's kind of, it is a question about like what that says about Trump's psyche, that such words could come out of his mouth. That leads again to my question, which is, so Trump is like pushing back on parts of your book. He's saying Mike Bender, third-rate reporter. He's saying the story about me and Mike Pence and Corey Lewandowski isn't true. So it's not like Trump's being silent about you and your book, Mike. And yet, strangely, Trump has not said a word about your claim that he praised Adolf Hitler. So what, what is that about?
I don't know that he must know that no one will defend him on this one.
Right.
You know, like he. Again, like I think that's sort of that's what's most dangerous about President Trump here, is that he's so imprecise with the way he speaks that in an instance like this and others, it can really have unintended consequences. And to give it, you know, I mean, again, that bring us to explain what happened on January 6th, and I do think part of his attack on me on the Pence bit was just the attention that this book has gotten, I think has finally gotten to him. Yeah. And I think that was a big part of it, and that he was reacting less to the anecdote and more to that story being picked up by other outlets. And you know what? Like I know Donald Trump knows how many people I talked to for this book. He knows people very close to him that talked to me for this book and didn't talk to other reporters. Right. He knows the sourcing I have on this because they've all told him, and I think that he's nervous about that. He survived all of these crises and had reason to believe that he could impose his reality on a pandemic as well.
I said it right at the beginning. The cure cannot be worse than the problem itself. Can't. The cure cannot be worse. But if you don't feel good about it, if you want to stay. Relax, stay. But if you want to get out there, get out. One thing with me, the nice part, I went through it. Now they say I'm immune. I feel so powerful.
So powerful, Mike.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. Not just about the him saying that, although there is a lot to say about just that little piece of sound, but about the whole of it, the whole of you know how you write about COVID, a giant policy challenge, public health emergency, once in a generation, once a century crisis that shaped the presidency, shaped the last year of the presidency, shaped the campaign, and a huge political challenge, or potentially some would say would have been a huge political opportunity if Trump had done it well. If Trump had managed the pandemic well, I think everyone agrees he would have been reelected, with ease, given what we saw his performance was, having fucked it up completely. Yeah. So just talk about about the COVID of it all in your amazing new book, Frankly, We Did Win This Election.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the COVID is obviously a string throughout this book here, and a couple things. One is I think what's new about this book when it comes to the policy response and the administration's response is that they initially viewed this. There were people in the administration who said, this is a big deal. We need to, get masks on immediately. We have to, have responses to this immediately. I mean, in January of 2020, while Trump was still having a Beijing delegation into the White House to celebrate his trade deal, right? But the thing that was striking to me, and going back and re-reporting all of this, was that at that point, all the things that Trump had survived, right? I mean, going back to 2016, he'd ridiculed John McCain, not just John McCain's military service, and no one and nothing mattered, right? And example after example of that, Robert Mueller doesn't really dent him. Impeachment in December, January of 2019, 2020, he comes out of stronger. Yep. and the people who were still around Trump at that point, when it comes to, they saw these other guys as alarmists, right? The Peter Navarros of the world.
Access Hollywood, which you've cruised by, right? It's just incredible things, right?
Yes. So so in one sense, it's sort of, you can sort of understand how they would think like, well, this is just the next thing to, just the next news cycle to survive. And that's why, and it's that attitude that is the reason why alerts from Peter Navarro and all his executive orders, or Matt Pottinger, who had spent a former a former soldier, military intelligence, who had spent time in Asia and had firsthand experience with SARS over there. He's waving flags and raising alarms, and they're treated as alarmists. And don't you guys know we survive all of these things? And Trump just never. This is the president who shot baskets with paper towels in Puerto Rico after a hurricane.
But there are two elements to this, Mike. Right. One element of it is we know now from Woodward's book. That from Woodward's last book, that Trump in real time, Trump was not in the dark. Trump understood how dangerous COVID was, and he decided to publicly downplay it, rather than telling the American people the truth about how serious the pandemic, how serious the virus was. That's I think what I want to talk about is what I want to ask you about is those decisions of how Trump decided to downplay the virus at first, and then how he decided to portray his own having been infected with it. That those are political choices that the president made, and I'm curious about what you think about what the book reveals about how the White House processed those choices, or how Trump processed those choices. Yeah,
I mean, it goes back to how he first approached COVID, and that he just he'd survived all of these crises and had reason to believe that he could impose his reality on a pandemic as well. And that's what he tries to do. I mean, even when he gets the virus, John, in the book I have some back and forth. There are people who told me that Trump tested positive the same morning Hope did. The morning he went to Bedminster and had a fundraiser.
Right.
But then when I thought it was a false positive, right? It's not a false positive. It turns out he gets very, very sick. For a moment there, Trump is humbled by this thing. He is very, very sick, right? I mean, we know that. We knew some very good reporting even at the time about how behind the scenes how sick he was, and there seems to be for the people around him. It seems to have. A light seems to have gone on with Trump about how serious this is, and
he thought he was going to die at one point, right? I mean, I think it's been reported that he was very sick, much sicker than they were letting on publicly at the time, and that he was, he's very phobic about his health and very phobic about death, and he was again at one point he was like, this is it, this could be the end for me. That's how serious it was in his mind.
Trump has been using hand sanitizer for years. After rallies, he uses dozens of wipes to wipe himself. Like, if there's anyone who knows how to use hand sanitizer, how to put on a mask the right way, right? It's Trump. Why don't you lean into your strength there, guy? And but he wanted to downplay it, and but yeah, he's sick. He like the team thinks there's a moment where he can be empathetic, right? He was so excited. This is what I in the book too. He was so excited about the medicine, the treatment he got, right? That he ends up calling the cure.
Right.
But they even see that his team sees that as an opportunity to talk about, the advances in medicine and, as a way to talk about COVID in an optimistic way of like we have good treatments, like things, help is on the way type of stuff.
Right.
And it doesn't even last the Marine One ride back to the White House, right? Like he wants to, jokingly, at least partly, arrive on the South Lawn and rip open his shirt to show a Superman sign, right? I mean, that's like, it just, the moment is there and gone. any hope they had for redefining or pivoting on this message was, was short-lived.